Okay, so we're moving to a new family, and there's only one member of the family Procyonidae that I want you to know for class, and that's the raccoon. And technically, this is the northern raccoon. I am going to start out by saying, before I forget, that there really should be no question about the identity of this animal when you're in New York State. However, I do want to point out that there are more than one species of raccoon in the New World. So here in green on the right is a blurry, apparently, range map of the northern raccoon. So you see that it is in all lower 48 states, then through Central America. And then in the blue on the left is a crab eating raccoon, which I have seen in Brazil. And I can tell you they look very, very similar to what we're looking at back home here. So it makes it easy that we've only got one species, and then we normally drop the word northern and just call it a raccoon. So I'm not going to be picky on the test, but I did want you to at least see the term there. Raccoons are very common, and you know that if you drive at all, you can find them napping on the side of the road quite often. But we don't tend to see them because they're nocturnal. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about their tracks to make sure that you guys can identify where raccoons have been. I also use this picture to remind me to tell you that raccoons are very good parents, at least the moms are. So this is a picture of a family group still together in October. She will often overwinter with her young. And the way I describe this is a little bit like how I describe black bears. So when you're an omnivore and you're eating something different every season, it takes you a long time to teach your young all that they need to know. So I don't know if that's exactly accurate, but that's a great way to kind of remember it. So raccoons are good parents, and seeing a group of raccoons is pretty common, and it's usually the mother and the young of the year. Speaking of the young of the year, I grew up in West Arundequite, which is a suburb of Rochester, if anybody knows. And this was on my neighbor's house when I think I was still living in my parents' house at the time. So these raccoons had been born inside that chimney that they're right next to there. So raccoons certainly are available here in rural environments like where I live right now, but they also are present in suburban settings like where I grew up. And finally, they are actually very common in urban settings like cities. There's evidence to suggest that the highest density of raccoons in New York State is in New York City, which makes sense. There's a lot of nooks and crannies for them to live in. There's lots of food available. There's no hunting allowed in New York City, so and they have fewer things that they have to compete with there. So they have a lot of things going for them. This is an animal that has really adapted well to the changes that humans have wrought on the environment. I'm surprised that there's two raccoons on the roof. I thought if there was just roof raccoons that you would see them shingly and not doubly. Shingle raccoon. So, can we talk for a minute about rabies? And if you're singing this song in your head, I am secretly judging you. Rabies are possible in any mammal, but there are some mammals that get rabies much more frequently than others. And I believe we talked about this with bats, did we not? So raccoons are another one that are considered a rabies vector, something that carries the rabies, and they're not a carrier with no symptoms. By the way, they're a carrier and they die from it. And then foxes, particularly gray fox in the Finger Lakes, seem to have higher incidence of rabies. And part of that is because there's a particular strain of rabies that's nicknamed raccoon rabies. And I don't want you to think that it's only present in raccoons, but it's particularly virulent in raccoons. So, in other words, if a raccoon gets exposed to the raccoon rabies strain of rabies, it's pretty much got no chance it's going to get it. If you get exposed to the raccoon rabies virus, you at least have a chance to fight it off. It's just very, very devastating in the raccoon population. So I believe I've seen a few rabid raccoons over time. I'm not entirely sure, but I have seen raccoons acting strangely. And strangely doesn't mean that they're out during the day. That's not enough to be considered strange behavior. Strange behavior would be walking in circles, listing to the side. You're kind of walking like you're drunk, sort of thing. Those are things, and being aggressive. That would be a big clue as well. Can we talk about identifying raccoon skulls here? So I guess I would say, and let's just be honest, you're at a disadvantage if you can't hold these skulls in your hand. So I recognize that, and I'm going to be kind on the final exam. Let's have a look at 3 raccoon skulls from the back room. So these are all in the FLCC collection. Here's a 6-inch ruler, so you get an idea of how big a raccoon skull is. Let me just talk about one characteristic that often gets cited. It has a light bulb shape to it. And I know you young folks in your fancy fluorescent light bulbs. I'm talking old school light bulb. That's a help. And we'll look at the teeth. That'll be the rest of the help. The reason I pulled these 3 skulls is I discovered that if I use this skull in the middle on the exam, more students got it wrong than if I use this one or this one on the edge. And it has to do with the top of the skull here. So I have to point something else out before I forget to. It didn't even occur to me that this was going to be an issue. See the nasal part of the snout here? The 2 nasal bones are missing from that skull. To me, that's no big deal. Like, that just went right over my head. But as soon as I put this slide up the very first time, students just keyed right in on that. So maybe some of you guys looked at that and said, wow, what's going on? There's just 2 nasal bones missing. That has nothing to do with the identification. What I'm looking at is, how the heck does the top of this skull look different than the top of this skull? Well, if I tell you that they're both raccoons, we've got 2 obvious possibilities. One is maybe it's male versus female. That's a great idea. It's not, but that's a great idea. The other is it's old versus young. And I'm going to tell you how I can tell this is young. You ready? Look at these lines right here. I can see a cross on the top of the skull. The cranium of the skull is actually made of 4 bones that end up getting fused together. So in these 2 older raccoons, you don't even see those sutures anymore. You don't even see those lines because the bones have all ossified, calcified, have all kind of grown together. But in the young animal, they're still growing together. And in the young animal, the top of the skull looks different because this crest here on top of the head, this ridge that holds their strong jaw muscles, isn't even formed yet. So students would get that skull in the middle on the test, and they would start with, is this a V or is this a U? Right? Do you see what I'm saying? How many of you thought this looks a bit like the foxes? Well, again, it was not something that I was conscious of when I first started teaching, because to me this looks nothing like a fox. Here, let's flip them over. So here's that skull again that's just missing the 2 nasal bones, that young one. And when I flip the skull over, you can see all that's in the back are all grinders. In fact, some of those teeth look very much like human molars. Stabbers in the front, grinders in the back equals omnivore. So this is a raccoon, not a fox. Fox have slicers in the back. I also guess I will just say one last thing. The snout is too long to be a cat and too short to be a wild canid. Really, raccoon skulls are not that difficult. I don't think raccoon tracks are that difficult either, except when they are. Don't you hate when people say stuff like that? But I really mean that. Like, I have seen enough raccoon skulls on different substrates, like the top of our barbecue grill, on our porch in a little bit of frost, in deep snow, in the sand, like you have here. Each one of them is going to present its own different challenges, and that's what makes tracking so much fun. But if I was going to give you a raccoon track on the final, I would give you an easy one that's very distinctive and shows the characteristics. Raccoons have 5 digits per foot, front and back. And when they walk, those digits tend to all point forward. Do you remember why I'm telling you this? It's because I don't want you to confuse this with the possum. The possum also has 5 digits on the front and the back, but the possums tend to sprawl their toes out, so their front foot looks like a starburst. And the back foot has that opposable big toe. Can you remember all the way back to that video? Were you one of the 6 people that watched it? That opposable big toe is going to stick out to the side like your thumb does. So a hind foot of a possum should be easy to tell, and the front feet should as well. I used to say this is my favorite picture of a raccoon track, and it's not. It's technically not a track, is it? So can you see what's happening? There's a raccoon climbing one of my trail cameras. He's climbing the tree, and he put his hand right over the lens of it. Here's a second raccoon in the background here. So this is one of those keep the paparazzi away, no more pictures kind of picture. But now this is my absolute favorite raccoon track. I was at a conference in Minnesota in 2017, and if this picture looks a little funny to you, it's because I'm filming through about 3 inches of water here. So here is a possum track. Look at how the toes all sprawl out. Is it worth me outlining them? Here's a raccoon track right next to it. Look how the toes point in the direction the raccoon is going. Whoop, that one didn't work out perfectly. Ignore this. I love it. That's my favorite picture right there. I've been waiting and waiting and waiting to get that. Okay. What else can I tell you about raccoons? Well, if you did the reading, you learned an awful lot about them as well. I covered the fact that they were omnivores. I gave you a bit of a heads up on their tracks and their skull. And usually by this time in the semester, I'm pretty pressed for time, so I will not give you any additional notes there. Can we do a side quest for another member of Procyonidae? This is a coati, also known as a coatimundi. And I took this picture in Guatemala back in 2007 and remains one of my favorite picture, I guess just because it was my very first one. Talk about light bulb shape. Holy cow, look at that big giant head and then the snout here to screw in. A lot of people look at this animal and think that it is a type of monkey, and I can't blame them. I guess it sort of looks like that, but what betrays it is those sharp claws there. Not a monkey kind of thing. A more recent encounter that I've had with coati was in Arizona in 2018. If you are following along with all of my PowerPoints, I have showed you this hummingbird feeder already with the long-tongued bat that was visiting it at night, and I also told you about this trip when I showed you my bobcat pictures. But there was another mammal that was raiding these feeders, and that was a coati. And so here's a gorgeous, another daytime picture. Often these animals are diurnal instead of being nocturnal like our raccoons are. And you can see the masky look on his face there, and who wouldn't want to suck up some sugar water during the day? There he is walking towards me. And then on the right, you can see as he's walking away, he's in a crotch of a tree here. Look at those back feet. They look so much like a raccoon back foot. They obviously are related. Wow, I believe this is my shortest video of the semester. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it wasn't a waste of time for the short one. In fact, you're probably thinking you could have made all of them short. In fact, you could have made this one shorter if you just stopped telling us stupid stories. All right, folks, we move on now. It's weasels next.